As I mentioned earlier in the Torah service, our parashah this week is entitled Pinchas. Pinchas means dark skin, and it's understood, or it's taught that they get this term from the fact that Pinchas could have come from, the mixture of a Hebrew man and an Israelite woman, an Egyptian woman, because he was noted for his dark skin. That literally means dark skin. And so anyway, it is a word unique to itself. Parashah is found in the book of Numbers, chapter 25, verse 10, and it goes into chapter 29, verse 40. Of course, our Haftarah, the original Haftarah portion would have been 1 Kings 18:46 to 19:21, but because of the fast days, this is in the 2 Shabbats of grievance, that the actual Haftarah portion this week was taken out of the book of Jeremiah, verse 1 to chapter 2, verse 3. And our Brit Chadasha portion was from the Gospel of John, 2nd chapter, 13, verses 13 to 25. Excuse me. One of the overwhelming themes that we find in this parashah is zeal. There is a zeal for God that is right, and there's a zeal for God that is not right. And this is what we find in these parashahs. It causes us to examine our relationship with God. Pinchas was the son of the high priest's son. He was Eleazar's son. And he wasn't a priest in and of himself just yet. He was still functioning as a Levite. But yet, he was advanced to priestly status because in the midst of the plague that had befallen the Israelites, because they were having sexual relations with the Midianite women and worshiping the Midianite gods, that he was given his own covenant of peace by God and priesthood. Pinchas, in the midst of this, witnessed this ruler of the Simeonites, Zimri, who goes into his tent with a Midianite woman, a princess of the Midianites, to cohabitate. And he rises up and he runs a spear through both of them while they're in the midst of their cohabitation. And this ends the plague that God had casted upon Israel for her blatant idolatry and rebellion against him. Pinchas had a zeal for God's sanctity, for whom God had called them to be as a people. We find that Israel is called out of the nations. This is what God says. God says, I have taken you out of the nations. I have sanctified you. I have set you to myself. Therefore, we are no longer like the rest of the world. Doesn't mean any better than the rest of the world, but it means that there is a difference in the way God views you. It's a difference in the way that God expects things out of you. He expected Israel to be solely his. To not be lured or tempted to go into other things, other gods. But they were not of that spiritual mindset yet to accomplish that. And thus they were led astray by the longings of the flesh and wound up worshiping other gods. And Pinchas is the one, because of his zeal, God saw that there was hope within Israel, and he stopped his plague. It asks us, do we really see the place that God has placed us in as it is, or are we just looking at it for what God will do for us? There's an old saying among believers, I got my insurance policy, I ain't got to worry about nothing else. That fire insurance policy. Relationship with God has got nothing to do with your fire insurance policy. Relationship with God says that you have set yourself apart to be His friend, to be His representative, to be one who stands up for God, for what God stands for, what God commands, and the way God asks us to live. It doesn't mean we have to be perfect people. Lord knows we're not perfect. But our passion, our main focus in our lives should be to represent Him well. And that if we find things among us that take us out of that, to be willing to stand up and to fight against it and to stand for God. If you'd read the traditional parish Haftarah portion for the parish this week, it deals with Elisha. It deals with Elisha, he's wanted because he just finished slaying all these priests of Baal, and Jezebel, King Ahab's other half, has sent out an order to kill him, take his life. So Elisha goes and he runs, and he winds up at Mount Horeb, the mountain of God, in a cave. And God asks him, why are you here? And Elisha says, because I'm standing up for you, and they're after me. I'm here because I have zeal for you, God. I stand for you what's right with you. And God asks him again, why are you here then? Because there's no one left in Israel. And God says there are 7,000 who have not bent the knee to Baal. Why don't you go join them? Elisha has zeal for God. He admits it. I'm zealous for you, Lord, and for your word. But the people. But how will the people know unless the ones who are zealous for God don't stand up and take a stand for God? When in Jeremiah, the Lord says, I've known you before I formed you in the womb. I already had set the purpose in your life. What does Jeremiah respond to God when God says that He wants to send him to His own people to condemn them? But I'm just a boy. And God tells him, don't worry. I will protect you. I will deliver you. Yes, they will not like you. Yes, they will not want to listen to you. But I will take care of you. And Jeremiah does survive. Jeremiah survives the taking of Jerusalem. And actually, instead of going into Babylon with the rest of them, Jeremiah gets sent to Egypt. But he stood zealous for God, even as a young man. He was willing to say what was necessary. In our Chadasha portion, we see where the Lord has zeal for His Father's house. by whose authority do you do this? I don't need authority. I know this is wrong. And this is my Father's house. And I'm going to clean it up. And that's what he did. Was it wrong to sell animals for sacrifice? Was it wrong to change money? Because what it was a certain coin that had to be used inside the temple. It was the sanctuary shekel that had to be offered when you brought a monetary gift. So if you were coming from, say, way out in Assyria, where they use a different type of currency, you wouldn't have a sanctuary shekel. So what you would do is just like today when you go to a foreign nation, you exchange money for the money you can use in the place you're at. Was that wrong? No. What was wrong is that they were doing these things inside of the sanctuary of God. The only thing that's to be taking place inside the sanctuary of God is the worship of God. And this is what Yeshua's point was. You making my Father's house a house of merchants and not a house of prayer. They could have sold all that stuff right outside the temple gates. Wouldn't nobody, even the Lord wouldn't have bothered them. It'd have been fine. It's not inside the sanctuary of God, where your mind should be focused on God and the things of God, and not on whether or not you have a sacrifice with you, whether or not you have the temple shekel with you. And you got to understand, they won't just, they were bartering, Well, this is a nice lamb here. I'll let you have it for, I don't know, 10 shekels. Another guy says, not 10 shekels, I'll give you 8 shekels. You understand? You're bartering with what you're going to offer to God as a sacrifice. You really think God's impressed with that? Man, I got a sacrifice with you, God, and I only had to give 5 shekels for it. That idiot over there gave 15 shekels for his. No. That's turning the house of God, that's turning your worship of God into something that is a commodity and not something that is your zeal, your passion, your life. What distinguishes the prophets from the average person was the passion they had for God. It was at that level where nothing else mattered but God, His Word, and what God would use with them. And we should, as believers, we should have a passion like that. You ever known anybody like that? I've been blessed to know quite a few people like that. And there is a very big difference in these people's lives than the average believer's life. Not that they're any better. Most of the time they actually have more troubles. But it's the way that they interpret their situation, the way that they look at things. They don't see it as something that's terrible. They see it as something that God may be using in order to bring glory to Him. I know a gentleman, his name is Herb Branch. Now, he's a die-hard, faithful believer in the Lord. And he will tell you exactly what he thinks. Sometimes a little much of what he thinks. But this is a man who survived being electrocuted with 480 volts. Was technically dead for 11 minutes. Who God allowed to go to Israel and live in Israel for 7 years and help create some of the greatest defense systems that they have in Israel. He was part of that creative team. And yet he got kicked out of Israel because He wasn't Jewish. But yet God brought him back to Israel too. Faithfulness to God, his zeal for God, his zeal for God's people. A man would spend 2 hours in prayer every morning. Never had anything around him that didn't focus on God. And he had bad days. I know, because he was one of my employees. And he'd have bad days. It's just not my day. It's just not my day. I said, it'll be all right. He said, that's right. It'll be all right, but it's just not my day. It's God's day. And he can have it. But then he would talk to God the rest of the day. Literally talk to God. Has a great relationship with God. Great prayer life. He has zeal for God. He would be someone like Mordecai that would challenge you. Are you really living for God like you say you are? Because you look at me, you're thinking of your own faith walk, thinking of your own life with God. How are you representing God? It challenges you. See, the prophets aren't there to say they're better than you. The prophet is there to show you what you could become and challenge you. Where is your zeal for God? Where is your zeal for the things of God? What does God want to see out of his people? He wants to see love from his people. Love of each other. And love of others. How many congregations can you truly say that you've been in that you have seen perfect love among the congregation? I don't mean where there's some little dislike or something, but I mean love, where despite the differences, they would lay each other's lives down for each other. See, that's the perfect love. Just like Yeshua told his disciples, you know, you will love one another as I have loved you. Now, Yeshua didn't like everything they did he? Come on, Peter put his foot in his mouth every time. You know, James and John thought they were better than the rest of them. You know, you have all these idiosyncrasies of personality, but they loved one another. Loving and liking is two different things. As the body of Messiah, we need to be in a place where we can embrace each other in a way that covers the multitudes of things that can cause division. Because we forgive one another, we're graceful to one another, we are merciful to one another. We see each other as the same thing we are, a work in progress. God is still working on us to take us and make us into Him. Also, we have a passion to do what's right before God. When we see something that's wrong, we don't stand silent. We say, that's not right. This is not God honoring. Speaking truth and being judgmental are two different things. Speaking truth acknowledges that you are on God's side and you support what God says. Judging others is putting yourself in God's place, which no man can put himself in the place of God. How many times have you gone to visit a congregation and you can feel people judging you for the way you look or who you're with? Should it really make a difference? They should be excited that someone's coming to hear the message you may have, right? But that's not what a lot of people feel. You know, it's sad to say that in the body of Messiah there's so much separation because of the differences between each other that I don't see where they'll ever get a unification where the Spirit of the Lord can move among them and actually show the very image of Christ. no zeal, no passion for what really is of God. He just wanted the purity of God's presence, the purity of that relationship with God. And he just wanted to destroy that which would withhold it from him and from the rest of Israel. Yeshua wanted the purity of God and his presence in God's house. How can you be actually communing with God? How can you be actually trying to hear from the Spirit of God, who's known in Judaism as the batakol, the small voice? It's not booming loud like you would think. He speaks to you in a small whisper. Why? Because it forces you to listen. And then that small voice becomes a loud cry in your heart. There's a difference. How can you listen for that small voice of God if you're too busy being bombarded with people selling ox and sheep and changing money? How can you be preparing yourself to hear from God, to focus on God and focus on the things of God? You can't. People like to say one time, what is the real purpose of the talents, the prayer shawl? The purpose of the prayer shawl is to have your prayer closet. If you don it over your head like you're supposed to when you're in prayer, it does two things. It blocks your peripheral vision, where you can't be disturbed with somebody else that's doing beside you, and it kind of covers your ears, where you can't hear if someone's whispering something. And you can focus your mind on the things of God. Get the zeal for God. We need the zeal for God to sustain us. It's when we hear from him. It's when we can hear his voice. The body today needs this zeal. I hear all the time from other ministers and all this stuff. They want revival. They want all this revival and restoration. But you know, you got to do the first thing that will bring revival back. You got to revive yourself to God. How can you inspire others to get closer to God if you're no closer yourself? How come Yeshua was so successful in teaching the 12 disciples? Because he lived everything he said. Inspiration, leadership comes from having the real zeal you need for God. It brings you a covenant of peace. I mean, are we that determined in our faith? Are we that determined in who we are in God that no matter what anyone else can say about us, that we will still stand fast with God, that we will not abandon him and his word or his precepts? That is the type of passion and zeal that we're talking about. That you're willing to subject yourself to whatever God would have you to be subjected to in order to bring forth the message that he wants to bring forth out of you through your life. For it will glorify him, not you. That's the zeal you should have for God. You notice at the end of things, Peter denied the Lord 3 times, right? We know that, when the Lord met him on the shores of the Galilee, and he asked Peter 3 times if he loved him, right? Do you love me? Do you love me more than these? A lot of people leave that part out. What are the these? Do you love me more than what you know? Your lifestyles of fishermen, your talents. Do you love me more than these men that have become your friends? And do you love me more than anything in this world whatsoever. Do you love me more than these? That's your passion. That's your zeal. That's what God is looking for. Not everyone will be called to be an Elijah. Not everyone will be called to be a Jeremiah. Not everyone will be called to be a Pinchas. But we are called to be His witnesses in the way we live. And I challenge people with that. I want, in our own congregation, I want a community of people who really love one another. Who have a zeal and a passion for the things of God. Because the day will come when the world will make you choose. And will you choose well? Will you choose what you know is the real passion of your life? Everything else you love should come out of that passion. Everything else you care about should come out of the passion you have for God. Because God is the source of all love and all passion. And when we have that zeal and that passion for God, our other relationships become much brighter, much dearer, and much more valued than those who do not have that passion. It's the glue that holds everything together. These are the things that the zeal of God teaches. It teaches the need for God. Foundation of everything, which will bring us into the love of others because we have God's heart. Any questions? Any comments? Let us go forth and be like Pinchas. Let us be zealous for the things of God. Let us show forth a true witness to Him. Honest witness. I didn't say perfect. I said honest. Then we will grow into what God has really called us to be. And then we will really be able to see how God can use each and every one of us to bring forth the glory and the message that is of Messiah. Shabbat Shalom.